Solving quadratics. A method for solving any quadratic. The quadratic formula. Here's what it says. Given ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. The square being there tells us this is a what kind of equation? It's a quadratic equation. Ax squared plus bx plus c tells us it's in what form? Standard form. So if we're given a quadratic equation that is in standard form and has been set equal to 0, this formula applies. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. That is a formula that needs to be committed to memory.
You give me a stop that.
Can I get that tattooed on my arm?
Quadratic formula says given a quadratic equation, it has to be in standard form and it has to be set equal to 0 for this formula to apply. But if it is, the formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This needs to be memorized. I will show you the proof of this after we take the midterm. I will show you why this formula works, because I'm always told at the end of the year I will never show you anything with explaining why it works. But I will wait till after the midterm to show it to you. Showing you why it works will not be beneficial right now.
Does that mean you're going to show us that weird thing?
I will also show you that at the same time.
Okay.
Yes. So, here's an example. Let's start off with an example that could be done without the quadratic formula. X squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. It is a quadratic equation. It is in standard form. It is set equal to 0. That means that this quadratic formula applies. But we can also factor this. It's a trinomial. What are the factors of 8 that equals 6? Jared said it. It's 4 and 2. And then to solve the answer, you just take these two and do what with their signs? Flip them. So instead of 2, the answer is going to be what? Negative 2, and then the other answer is going to be negative 4. So if we're doing this with factoring, it's a two-step equation. You factor, you set it equal to 0, you get negative 2, negative 4. That's the answers. But now we're going to apply the quadratic formula. First thing is, it has to be in standard form. This is. It has to be set equal to 0. This is. Then you identify what is A, B, and C. A. A is 1. The number that's in front of x squared is a 1. B is what? 6. And C is 8. Now, that should be something you can do mentally. I'm doing it for the sake of notes, but that's something you should be able to make note of mentally. You wouldn't have to write down. Then we're going to go to this formula. Once you have the formula, you don't have to have it written down. Once you know it, have it memorized. You can go straight to substituting. It is a quadratic equation. It is set equal to 0. That means that this formula applies. And then we're going to fill in this formula with the coefficients that have been given to us. So we're going to replace the b with what number? 6. So this is going to say x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root, what goes in for the next b? 6 again, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 8. All over 2 times 1. Yes. No. I believe so. Okay, so now we're going to simplify this. X equals -6, that stays -6, plus or minus the square root. What's 6 squared? 36. -4 times 1 times 8. What kind of 32? A -32. -4 times 1 times 8 is -32. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. We get -6 plus or minus the square root of 4. Once you get here, you have to simplify the radical. Square root of 4 becomes what? 2. And then what we have is we have two things. We have -6 plus 2 divided by 2, and then we have -6 minus 2 divided by 2. Anyone see that? So what we'll do then is we'll split this up. -6 plus 2 divided by 2, -6 minus 2 divided by 2. Once you get here, guys, you can type it in your calculator. If you're typing it in your calculator, though, you need to make sure you put everything in the top in parentheses. Because if you don't, the calculator will do 2 divided by 2 first, and then add that to -6. You're not dividing just the 2 by 2. You're dividing the entire top by 2. What is, and we don't really need a calculator for this, what's -6 plus 2? And what's -4 divided by 2? -2. -6 minus 2? -8. And -8 divided by 2 is -4. So we get x equals -2, x equals -4. The same answers that we got when we did factoring. We get the same answers that we got by factoring. It takes longer. But if you want to commit one thing to memory, the quadratic formula always works. Factoring does not always work. Factoring only works if the answers are going to be whole numbers or fractions. Factoring does not work if you have square roots in the answer. The quadratic formula will always work, because it has the square root as part of its formula. Alright. Let's do some more examples. X squared plus 3x minus 6 equals 5x plus 4. This is a quadratic equation because it has an x squared in it. It is in standard form, but is it set equal to 0? No, so we've got to get it equal to 0. So we're minus the 5x and the 4 over. That gives us x squared. 3x minus 5x. -2x. -4 or -6 -4 makes -10. Once you have it in standard form and you have it set equal to 0, that's when you say what is A, what is B, and what is C. A is what? 1. B is -2. And C is -10. Quadratic formula is x equals -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You do not have to write the formula down every time. If you know if you know it, you can go straight to substituting. Substituting gives us negative. What do we put in for b? Negative 2. So that's later going to turn into what? Positive 2. So plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared. You need to put it in parentheses because if you type in negative 2 squared without parentheses in your calculator, it'll give you the wrong answer. Minus 4 times 1 times negative 10. All over 2 times 1. Simplifying. We said it a minute ago. Negative 2 turns into 2. Once you get good at this, guys, you can go straight to figuring out this entire inside. But for right now, negative 2 squared is 4. Negative 4, 1, and negative 10 make what?
40. Positive.
A positive 40. If you're comfortable with going straight to the 44, that's fine. Now, is 44 a perfect square? No. That means that these answers will not be whole numbers or fractions. That means that this problem could not have been done by factoring, even if we attempted it. We should check because are there any factors of 10 that make 2? No. 1 and 5 doesn't, or 1 and 10 does not work, and 2 and 5 does not work. So this can't be factored. But radical 44 can be simplified. We can rewrite 44 as 4 times 11, right? So it becomes 2 plus or minus 2 radical 11 all over 2. Yeah. Okay. So, we simplified the radical, and then we ask ourselves, let's look at all the rational numbers. 2, 2, and 2. They're all divisible by 2. So let's reduce it. You only divide it by what they all have in common. So we're going to divide them all by 2, and it becomes 1 plus or minus the square root of 11 over 1. Is putting it over 1 necessary? No. So it's 1 plus or minus the square root of 11. So we'd say our answers are 1 plus the square root of 11, 1 minus the square root of 11. Now, what are those as decimals? You have to punch that in the calculator. The ACT is designed where you can take it without a calculator. So if this question was on the ACT, these would be the answers. But if we're trying to find an approximate answer, for the sake of maybe doing a word problem later on, we can type this in. What's 1 plus radical 11? 4.31, okay, so 4.317, right? That's 6.6. And then the subtraction would be negative 2.317. Now, guys, let's try not to lose track of what all this. If you take a function, any function, you set it equal to 0, inevitably you're replacing what variable with 0? Any function is set equal to y. So if you put a 0 right here, you're setting this function equal. You're setting y equal to 0. Plugging in 0 for y is a method we learned in chapter 1 on how you solve for what? X-intercepts. So what that means is x squared minus 2x minus 10 is a parabola that opens what direction? Up. So it's a parabola that opens up. We can find where the vertex is using the vertex formula, right? We now know where it crosses the x-axis. It crosses the x-axis at 4.317 and negative 2.317. Prove it? Desmond.
Prove it.
So, if we type in x squared minus 2x minus 10, it's a parabola that opens up. Here's the vertex. We can find that using the vertex formula. It crosses the x at negative 2.32 and 4.32. Negative 2.32 and 4.32. Okay? So when we solve a quadratic, inevitably all we're doing is trying to find out where the quadratic is crossing the x-axis. If we were trying to use this for a graphing. Okay, so that leads to the next problem, which you guys see I had typed up there. 3x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0.
Oh.
3x squared plus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. Is this a quadratic in standard form?
Yes.
Yes. Is it set equal to 0? Yes. That means the formula applies. Is this a parabola that opens up or down? The amplitude is 3. That's a positive number. That means it opens up. So if we were to type this in, 3x squared. Remember, the quadratic formula tells you where the parabola crosses the x-axis. If we type this in and we graph it, we have a parabola that opens up, but what's the issue? It doesn't cross the x-axis. So here's what happens when that's the case. All right, so we're going to work this out with the quadratic formula. It's already in the form it needs to be. A is what? 3. B is 5. C is 6. Okay, you would not need to write those down. That's something you should be able to do mentally, but for the sake of notes, that's what we're going to put. Once again, you would also not need to write down the formula. If you know the formula, you can go straight to substitution. So it's going to be negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 6 over 2 times 3.
Andrew,
Yeah.
Where's the 4?
The 4 is a constant that we always use.
Okay.
And after we get through with the midterm, I'll show where it comes from. So we get negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 4 times 3 times 6 is 72. 25 minus 72 is what?
Negative 47.
Negative 47. Yesterday, we went over quadratics, when they're factored, have rational answers. If they cannot be factored, they either have irrational answers or they have imaginary answers. Since this is the square root of a negative, that means it's imaginary. So how we write the answer is this. Negative 5 plus or minus, it's an imaginary radical 47. So we bring an I out front, and we change it to a positive. Because we're saying that that's an imaginary 47. So that should make sense, because if this is a parabola that opens up, and it's already above the x-axis, if it's never going to cross the x-axis, and you try to solve for where it crosses the x-axis, the answers are going to be imaginary answers. So you can't go anywhere with this. This is where you stop. And at the beginning of the notes, I said this is a method that can be solved or be used to solve any quadratic. So x squared minus 9 equals 0. It would be quite redundant to solve this using the quadratic formula. It can be solved with square roots. It can be solved by factoring. Solving by square roots is easy. What do we do with the 9? Now, we add it over, and we square root 9, which gives us 3 or negative 3. That's a quick way to do it. Another quick way to do it is, well, that's a binomial, and they're both square rooted. They can both be square rooted, so we can factor it to x plus 3, x minus 3. That's difference of squares. And if you factor with difference of squares, then you can set both of these equal to 0, which gives you -3 and 3. So we do difference of squares. That factoring method gives us the same answer as solving it with roots. But if we were to if we did for some reason say, okay, I want to use the quadratic formula for every single quadratic, what we would do is we'd start off by saying, is it in standard form? Yes. Is it equal to 0?
Yes.
Yes. So we identify A, B, and C. What's A?
1.
1. What's B?
9.
0. C is -9. Your B value is the coefficient that's attached to x. There is no x's, so B is 0. Jeff, Andrew, I've asked you twice now. Plug this into the formula, -b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We're going to replace b with what?
0.
0, so it's -0 plus or minus 0 squared minus 4 times 1 times -9 all over 2 times 1. What's -0? 0, so it's not needed. So we have plus or minus the square root. What's 0 squared? 0, so that goes away. -4, 1, and -9. Positive 36, because you've got two negatives. Simplify your radical. What's the square root of 36 simplified?
6.
So what we have is we have positive 6 divided by 2 and -6 divided by 2. So x is 6 divided by 2. X is -6 divided by 2, which gives us x is 3. X is -3. The same answers we get using factoring, the same answers we get using roots.
So if you gave us like a quiz like that, couldn't we just do the regular other